Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based on the west side of Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictive compulsive behaviors. Welcome to my podcast, named after my recent book, It's Not About the Sex. Here we have honest conversations related to compulsive sexual behavior and trauma, all from a sexual health perspective. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints and practical strategies toward establishing greater intimacy and a more deeply connected life. Let's begin. Dr. Carlos Canales is a licensed clinical psychologist, certified group psychotherapist, and somatic experiencing practitioner. He received his doctoral degree from Rosemead School of Psychology in 2007. He is fluent in psychodynamic, gestalt, somatic experiencing, and attachment-focused psychotherapy. During his career, he has worked at multiple settings, including university counseling centers, community mental health centers, and hospitals. He opened his private practice in 2011 and founded Vida Psychotherapy, an outpatient clinic in West Des Moines, Iowa. Dr. Canales is bilingual and bicultural, and he is a member of several professional organizations, including the American Group Psychotherapy Association, of which he is a fellow. So welcome, Carlos. I'm so glad you could be with us this morning.
Thank you. Super excited.
You know, it's interesting. You're actually, I was thinking about this, the first person from Iowa that is joining us on our podcast. So that's a very big honor. I want you to know that for both of us, maybe.
Well, I'm not surprised. I was such a flyover state in many ways, but it's also charming and beautiful, and so I'm pleased to live here, and I hear very frequently, "You're from where? Ohio?"
Originally,
right?
right. Ohio, Minnesota, Nebraska.
Yeah. That's right.
Yes, yeah. But you guys have the Iowa State Fair.
That's right.
You have the Iowa caucuses.
That's right. We have ways to show up.
And you have wonderful academic institutions. Not everybody knows that. So
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Schooling is good. Yeah. Well, thanks for noticing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I do my homework.
Yeah. Very good.
So again, I'm so glad you could be with us. And I was reading some of the notes that you shared with me. And one of the things that you said was that your attention was brought to the idea of how on our podcast, there's an intention to inspire those in long-term recovery. And I love what you said in response to that. I'll read it. It says, "I want to talk about the many necessary recoveries every person needs to engage in well-being." And I thought that was beautifully put. Can you share a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah. You know, everyone who studies psychotherapy, it's in recovery from their families in some ways. Is paying attention to how their life history has introduced them to suffering of some form that they want to alleviate. And so for me, my first marker, my first awareness of what I needed to like recover or make better sense of was my transition to the US when I came, and I was 16, and I had very broken English, almost no English. And it left a mark, right? Like the overcoming of this experience. And it shows up here and there. And I need to recover from that overwhelming and also transformative moment. And later in my life, I looked back into what was it like to live with my family now that I'm in a different environment? You know, what were the pluses and minuses, and what tendencies was I left with that are so important to me, that speak to my attachment to them, to the geography, the culture, the food, and how do I make it here distant from them? That's a different kind of recovery, right? And my attractions to certain affects, right? Certain pulse of emotions. I have to always be visiting that kind of mindset that can steal me. So I think that the recovery community has something to point to whenever they speak about recovery and says, hey, whether it's substances or processes or behaviors. But I think all of humanity needs to make sense and address, where do they tend to go and where their best self lives.
Mm.
Yeah.
Where the best self lives. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So you mentioned coming to the US. What country did you come from?
So I came from Peru.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew that. I just wanted our listeners to know.
Yeah, I came from Peru, and this is another. So Peru, like the U.S., has its regions: coastal, mountain, jungle, the north, the center, the south. And so I was born in a mountainy place, very unlike Iowa, big Andes. And I was born in a place that had a lot of history in regards to Inca tradition, in regards to ancestry. And so then, all of us have so many parts to ourselves that show up. So even as you bring this up, it just shows up and how do I use this again in the pursuit of my better self?
Sure.
Yeah.
And excuse me, along those lines, what do you mean by the complexity of life or the complexity of living?
Well, that is the in some ways, what do we need in order to live well? Well, some people might say good nutrition. Some people might say get enough rest, be surrounded by friends. Like the ingredients of good living is not terribly exhausting and maybe universal. But it so turns out that everybody's life is worth a novel. It's populated by good characters and bad characters and tragic circumstances and I may even add individual personal ambitions. And so the tapestry of anyone's life becomes so incredibly populated by many invitations. And I think that is attending to those invitations and learning to discern this, not that, how much of this, how much of that, with whom is enormous. It's very complex. And I don't think it's meant to be resolved alone. Right? It's meant to be resolved just in this conversation, how our lives are enriched, our experience, our emotional experience, hearing your soothing voice and receiving your eyes and your attention just settles my excitement to be in your podcast, but also invites more flavors and more complexity and what to do with that.
Right. And if I can add to that, there's something about the curiosity and the wonder, really,
Right.
of life in a way, and how it's not a finite process that we're talking about. It's a lifelong, I don't know if the word is lifestyle, but it's a desire to grow.
That's right. It's so important. The word curiosity is often used in psychotherapy because we want people to be in the seeking world, like to be curious, to be open, to sniff. But very quickly, I want curiosity to be even more so cognitive or experiential. How much juice do I want? How close should I get to Andrew? And allow myself to, bring
Yeah.
my senses in and really have an experience, right? With everything. I went for a run this morning and I thought that would be better than coffee. And and in Iowa, there's these changes of seasons that are so marked, right? So everything is starting to become green and you get a sense of the birds and the expansive skies. And I was like, for a second, I'm so blessed. Can I soak that up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's only a second. It's gonna pass, because then I gotta get to work and get the kids to school and all of that, right? Like so the life is complex in the how much do we give ourselves to various things. Yeah.
And in that moment, if we can hold that idea, I hear that there's something about savoring the moments,
Mm-hmm.
something about giving ourselves that larger awareness of what really touches us, maybe
That's
touches
right.
our heart, our soul,
Right.
and also how to build new neural pathways based on that, the experiential.
That's right.
So I think what you're really pointing to, which is really in this next idea that you brought up here, is what are the universal dynamics that require us to address or to recover from?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I to even tap in a little bit to this experience of running this morning and noticing a cardinal or noticing a tree and the leaves that are about to come. Or in Spanish, there is two words for knowing. There is saber, which is connected to savory, and conocer, which has more of a cognitive. In fact, the word cognition comes from that root as well.
Mm,
And so there is something about knowing in the moment, savoring, bringing your senses, becoming alive to that moment. But I also know that if I look, because I've looked many times, that this will be good for me. So I think something about the universal dynamics is this relationship between me in the experience and me and my suppose long-term emotional life.
mhm,
It is what comes to mind is that we have our eyes open or closed
mm,
uh, because we have habits of what we see and what we don't see.
mm,
And so you really need to become aware as to what those habits are and give yourself opportunities to open or close them more intentionally, right?
mhm,
Like undo the automatic, right? Bring your intention and your will and your heart and your community around what is it that you value and what is it that you want to make sense of. So we get signals from inside and sometimes from our world as to what feels more right or more whole or more expansive or more constructive.
mm,
Right?
mm,
I was I've become aware that there was this family that immigrated and they were placed in a little scam. And the wife is now cleaning houses. Their paperwork is getting done, but the husband is without work. And he says, "I can do anything. Give me work. I can do anything." And um, I'm busy. I'm busy with my kids. I'm busy with my practice and all the things. But last night I resolved, well, what are the things that I would pay for, that I would like to do in my house, but I could pay for and be done? And I resolved that moment. And I called him and I said, "Would you be willing to do this?" And he says, "And more."
mm,
So then I called a friend and I said, "What do you need done in your house? I know somebody who like a job." And that's going to be your birthday present. And so somehow, as I went to bed, I realized I did something new, and I think it's good. And let me feel into that. That I'm actually benefiting from
mm,
from this good thing, and being able to open my eyes or open my heart to experience the good that I can create or that can happen around me. Like I
mhm,
feel more loved.
mhm,
Morning I woke up and I was like, what should I make for his dinner? Like he's in some ways he's working for me, but in some ways he's my guest of goodness. Right. And so, anyways, I I think there are universal dynamics that happen because of our habits, and we can tweak them. We can create those new pathways.
Mm.
And I think as we share what we're tweaking in our lives, our habits, and these new possibilities with others, they
Hmm.
also have the possibility of tweaking and telling us what improves them.
So it becomes contagious in a
It
sense.
becomes contagious. It becomes contagious. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also wanted to add that it's such a beautiful illustration of generosity of spirit
Mhm.
and generosity of heart and opening your heart to the possibilities. And in turn, you were grateful, right? You had that experience of gratitude and were able to soak in that.
Yeah. And what I didn't realize, I mean, I had a lot of jobs in my house that needed to get done.
Mm.
I needed to be vulnerable to look at what I needed, right? Like, and to open my house, because he's going to stay in my house for a week or a week and a half. And so to help me fix this thing. So I think there is something about, um, I guess, bringing people close to you
Hmm.
for all of this to happen. And so, and negotiating the feelings, I think vulnerability is a hard thing for all of us. I think perhaps that is one of the universals to answer the earlier question
Hmm.
is that the more we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable, the more courageous we become, and the more we can organize others to us.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And if I can highlight something, because I think this is really vital, I used to think that the goal of long-term sustainable recovery was about having a bigger life, both internally and externally, and opening up in ways that would create new experiences, et cetera. But what I also hear you saying, which is so important, is that it's so important to have choice in that, to
Yeah.
know when someone feels safe enough,
Yeah.
when there's that open-heartedness and willingness to be vulnerable, and that there's no mandate, there's no right or wrong about that.
It's not right or wrong. Right. We have to go back to um, our capacity, emotional capacity, even for satisfaction, for contentment, and really work slowly in recognizing, is this satisfying? It's very much like when somebody makes, if there is a family meal, and I say this because my mom's staying over, and every meal that I make, she goes, it's not quite right, right? And my definition of Peruvian food is, if a Peruvian made it, it's Peruvian, right? And
Uh-huh.
her definition is, anyway. So, but the kicker is noticing, is this satisfying versus does this hit the standard?
Right,
Is
right.
this yummy enough? And or would I like to improve it? Would I like to improve me? And
Hmm.
give yourself room to consider that. So appreciating your emotions and your capacity is so core
Hmm.
to universal growth and to this experience of vulnerability. And
Hmm.
noticing that perhaps a year ago I didn't have such a capacity, but today I can.
Hmm. Incrementally,
Yeah, incrementally. Yeah.
sure.
What one of the things that I think COVID did a lot for a lot of people, right? But I I've heard a lot that people enjoy their relationships, their more intimate, like their homes, the more because they had to be there, so they noticed new things. As we get back to life post COVID, like people are going back to their old patterns, and hopefully we won't forget that slowing down, living simpler, paying attention to what's really uh, um, sustaining, nourishing, gratifying. Like we really should invest in that. Right.
Right.
Uh,
And along those lines, knowing what we really want and desire,
right.
right? Sometimes we have to slow down enough in order to really
Right.
listen to that deeper voice within us.
Absolutely. And I'm a fan. It is so important, almost like 50-50, to spend time with you listening to that inner voice, and then share it with somebody. Because when you hear your voice with somebody and allow some feedback, I think it either concretizes it or you get to see the patterns, the blind spots, right? Like, because something is gained as you assert yourself, as you advocate for what you want. Something is gained about that contact with the environment.
For sure. So you mentioned emotions a moment ago, and I'm wondering if you could expand on what really is the role of emotions in all of this.
Yeah, my goodness, is so large. I sometimes consider emotions like the initiation to spirituality, because when we are born, we we require so much from our caregivers. We're so dependent from them, and we might have like a sensory emotional awareness. Something is either pleasurable or not pleasurable. Like mom or dad, they're with me, I'm fed, pleasurable, I'm good and well, satisfied. But when they're not around, any noise can freak me out and it's not pleasurable. And I don't know that I'm scared yet. I just know that there is some startle or some shock or some threat around me. And so ever since then, the more we develop, the more we compose emotional understanding about the world. And that has limitations, but it has a lot of potential. And we spend our lives managing what is it that we feel to whatever degree. And the more resilient we are, the more we have the capacity to understand that every sadness also involves a value and a joy. That it's hard to just experience sad.
Mm-hmm.
That the other side of that coin is, I'm sad because I loved, I'm sad because I lost, I'm sad because I have some connection to
Mm-hmm.
to an experience. And so I think the role of emotions is so crucial, because emotions sometimes tie us to patterns and tie us to unhealthy patterns that that we have to solve the emotion or the attachment to that, so that we can let go and become freer, or we can have more choice. So emotions are key, and we can have feelings for us and feelings towards somebody else, and those are differently organized at times.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think much of life is about emotional intelligence rather than resolving problems or making decisions. Yeah.
Taking this a bit further, with regards to recovery, how much should we attend to our mind versus our bodies?
Ah, that's very good. I think most of life, ever since you join a school, they teach you what 2 + 2 is, and they teach you what the capital of France is, and they want you to memorize certain things, and they want you to have formulas and solve problems, and so there is this aspect of knowing, or the intellect, that is very much like, hey, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
It's all, how are you going to distinguish yourself? So our minds are enriched mostly in the cognitive side, less so, much less so in the emotional side. I think
Mm-hmm.
education should have every year, a class just like math on emotions and how you're
Mm-hmm.
growing that way, how you're maturing that way, which is also part of our minds. I place it together. Now, what supports both is our body. That when we're born, and this is a quote from Freud, is that, first and foremost, we are a body, we're skin. The ego, first of all, first and foremost, is a skin ego, meaning everything that I experience has some representation in my body. And and it begins to inform the brain about how we're living. Are we cold? Are we hungry? Are we missing something? Are we supported? Are we safe? It informs the brain as to like what it might do, what meaning it might give it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I think that to the degree that we neglect the body, we just we're in Zoom all the time. We're just heads,
Talking heads.
talking heads, right? Antonio Damasio spoke about, when did he has a book called Feeling and Knowing.
Mhm.
And he talks about like bacteria and how they organized as beings without a brain, right? Like, and so apparently the history of civilizations is 3 billion years old. And they have cultures and they get together and they live and die. And it's only 500 million years old that first nervous systems were developed. Of course, that's a long time, but not compared to, 3 trillion or so.
Mhm.
And he postulates that our nervous system, our brains and spinal cords are not the bosses in life, that they were created to make sense of the wisdom of the body and
Mhm.
all that happens there. That
Mhm.
that we're actually subcontracting so that it's better organized that way. And
Mhm.
that's not what I learned in school. What I learned in school is like the brain and spinal cord. That's like, it's almost like the most important organ. But what we're learning about the body is that there is such an arrangement that the breathing system, the cardio system, the hormonal system, that they're all going to kind of come together, give me a much more integrated, holistic life. And so not paying attention to the body is ignoring some of your innate, very core to you spirit. And so it's strange to talk about the spirit of the body, right? But I do think that in some ways, like, it helps us put our feet on the ground and be in touch with our animal spirit, so universal.
You use the term animal spirit, and I wonder if, because of your background being from Peru, if that influences your own worldview, your own way of looking at human suffering, human growing, etc.
Wonderful question. Well, absolutely. I grew up in Cusco, as the capital of the Incas empires, and we would climb a mountain and let's say see the flight of a condor. And it was not unusual that people would talk about the spirit of the condor. Can you interact with it? And so
Mm.
I'm a bit of a mystic at heart, or the spirit of a particular mountain. And I would have a relative pass, and my grandma would hear the barking of the dogs, and she would know something. And she would talk to me about what was happening. So my mind, as scientific as I wanted to be, has this reverence for this, I don't know, maybe even quantum world in which um, we're so connected with the rest of humanity and the rest of nature, and we're connected with our geography in ways that we tend to not speak about. But it is our body, I think, the point of connection, that as nerve endings populate your gut, they inform you at a gut level what is taking place. And so I actually want to train more in reading my body better and honoring its messages. Yeah.
Mhm. Sure.
Yeah.
So let's say a client comes in to see you and they say, Carlos, I've been in recovery, whatever that recovery might be. I've been in recovery for several years,
Mhm.
and I'm still not feeling especially optimistic or inspired.
Mhm.
I know that there's got to be more to this life of ours, but I don't know where to start. How might you respond to someone like that?
Well, I again, the word inspired. There is something you're seeking, and there is something that you want to experience. And so I hop already at the um, resilience. You've been looking for so long, and you know there is more. I would invite the person to connect with, you might not think of yourself as spiritual in some ways, but you're living by a kind of faith. And I'm
Mm.
interested in walking along with you about that. And breaking it down from whatever inspiration they've composed, whatever monument of inspiration they've composed in their minds, I want to bring it down to decimal units that can be more satisfying, where the inspiration can become more concretized, right?
Mhm.
And so I think when we look at dreams or different ideas of success, even if we think that can easily be done, there is so many details to be felt, to be acknowledged, to be experienced. And so what I would say to this person is like, I'm so glad you're seeking. This is an aspect of humans that is also undermined. That you're seeking tells me that we're going to be in a journey together to pursue, to address what is it that you're seeking, and to see when do we approximate to that.
Mhm.
And also what you might need to let go. Sometimes we don't find because we are we might not be using a particular substance or engaging with a particular group of friends or dynamics, but we haven't taken steps in another direction. That sometimes in recovery was like, if I'm not doing this anymore, so why don't I feel
Mhm.
happy? Well, there is more to be pursued than to
Mhm.
just not do.
Once again, I just want to state the obvious that I think you're talking about the therapeutic relationship,
Yes.
and you're talking about walking beside your client. Sometimes I say that I'll walk beside you, sometimes I might walk behind you, sometimes, but I'll never walk in front of you.
Uh-huh.
And that there's something really powerful about that
Yeah.
validation of seeking, that if
Yeah.
somebody comes in, that courage, that vulnerability to come into our offices is really that experience of saying, yeah, I'm really desiring something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be. I would just tweak this as a difference. I don't know what it means to walk in front, but when the client comes to your office, I think there is a fantasy that you figure out how to be more satisfied in this particular life, right? Like or life situation. And that's a form of walking ahead, right? It's
Mhm,
quite the
mhm,
blind leading the blind, right? That you have some um, alternatives. You trust the process. That there is. I don't mind because I'm prone to admiration.
mm,
Like all of my friends I admire, not just my mentors. The
mm,
requirement of being my friend. And that in some ways, in the area that I admire, they're ahead of me. And so I would to the inspired person, I would also might use the fantasies that they might have about how I am ahead. And perhaps I am, but take it out. And there is a follow me, apprentice, mentor possibility that can also live. So, anyways, that would be my only tweak.
yeah. No, I appreciate that. And unfortunately, we're actually almost out of our time today. And I have a question that I like to ask, because this is a way to summarize a little bit.
Yeah,
If there was one or two things that you would really like our listeners to take from our discussion today, what would be most important?
I want to undo some of the biases that I sometimes hear about recovery. That those who are in recovery have messed up and they have to recover. To put it simply. And I just want to suggest that nobody gets it right on the first go, and sometimes on the 100th go, and much of life is actually about this improving where we were yesterday, right? And the second part is sometimes I'm not kind to myself when something doesn't happen, right? Like but breaking it down into like capacities or decimals or hey, what feeling might be getting in the way from, what habits, I had to fix something in a door, and I realized, man, how often do I hold a screwdriver? Not very often. So my fingers sometimes don't know what to do with screws and screwdrivers. They're like clumsy. And do I have not just compassion, but just a basic acceptance? This is not what I do. So why am I
Mhm.
being so hard? What, so so anyway, so there is this other side of like capacities and emotions that I have to make sense of. This is part of the complexity of life. It's not just, did you fix the door?
Right. And there's a self-compassion piece in what you said, and there's that acceptance piece, which
Yeah,
is a big part of formal 12-step recovery.
that's right.
So I love the image of the screwdriver and the screw, because yeah, our hands just may not be familiar recently with that
Right.
experience. So we are going to be a bit awkward.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So those would be the two things. And also a third thing, how
Please.
fun it is to be in conversation with a
Mm,
fellow traveler. Like it's so good
mm,
to receive someone interest. I mean, this is the metaphor for being in therapy and in counseling is that somebody's interested in your thoughts. Yum.
mm. Exactly. And oftentimes it's what we didn't get as a kid, or the gaps that were existing as a kid. And I
Exactly.
agree, it doesn't matter whether it's you and I speaking right now, or a mentor apprentice relationship, or two friends just sitting down over coffee. It's a beautiful thing.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos. I so appreciate you being here with us today. And if it's okay, I would love to invite you back at some point, because I feel like we just started a conversation today. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Same for me. Invite me anytime.
I
Yeah.
look forward to it. Thanks for listening today. It was so wonderful sharing this time with my colleague and friend, Dr. Carlos Canales, and discussing this really significant topic, moving from suffering to savoring. Dr. Canales can be reached through his website at vidapsychotherapy.com, and that's VIDA, Vida Psychotherapy. If you're so inclined, please give us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe and share my podcast with those who may benefit. I look forward to you joining us the next time, and don't forget to stay connected.